A lot of people ask me, how can I find out my Korean level? Well, there are a lot of things you could do, such as take the TOPIK test. You could take the military's Korean test, I guess. You can also grade yourself on what's called the CEFR, or sometimes just CER, which is Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. There are some problems with this, but first let's kind of cover what this system is. They have a rating system that goes from 1 to 6. So for level 1, you have a basic ability to communicate very simply. Level 2, you can start to express yourself straightforwardly. 3 is you can express yourself in a limited way. 4 is you can achieve most goals when speaking. 5 is you can communicate with unfamiliar topics and do that appropriately. And 6 is dealing with academic material and more demanding expressions. So in my opinion, it's kind of vague. And a lot of people that have told me their CEFR levels, I've noticed that they're grading themselves much higher than they actually are, or even sometimes lower than they could be. I have a slightly different system, which is also self-grading system, but in my opinion, a little bit better. And anybody you ask what their level is, they're going to tell you something completely different. And there is no one system for judging your level in a language, as long as you pick something that you feel comfortable with and that other people might be able to understand, then I think it's okay. One thing I should say about this is that this is self-graded, so you don't take a test to determine your level for this. But the TOPIK test, this test is supposed to kind of correlate to these 6 levels. So TOPIK also has 6 grades that you can get. The problem is the TOPIK test is more of a written test, and CEFR is supposed to be based on your actual just language abilities, including speaking, as well as reading and writing and everything. So if you take a written test, and you pass with grade 6, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a level 6 on the speaking scale. And in fact, a lot of the times I've seen people score well or poorly on the TOPIK, it doesn't match at all what their actual speaking ability is. Here is my personal level system for judging how good or bad at Korean you are. Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Now, within beginner, intermediate, and advanced, there are 2 categories, I would say, for each one. There's a low and a high. A low beginner would be someone who you really can't say what you want. In addition, anything you do say is not going to be how you wanted to say it. This is completely incapable of holding a conversation. High beginner is you can put together some sentences. So now you're starting to learn a little bit of Korean, but they're not going to be in the way you want at all. So you might be able to say, 안녕하세요, 반갑습니다, say a few things about your hobbies and introduce yourself. However, for a high beginner, you probably would be able to understand their reply to what you said if what they're replying with is something that you've studied. So a high beginner would be able to hear the Korean that they're learning. And a low beginner might say 안녕하세요, but not understand if the Korean replies back to them, 네, 안녕하세요, even if it's something that they've learned, just because they're so new to the language and they can't do that yet. Intermediate. A low intermediate, I would say, is someone who can express themselves basically, sometimes the way that they want, most of the time not the way that they want. In addition, you'd probably be able to understand a basic reply if it's about a simple topic that you've learned. You might get the gist of a conversation even if you don't understand what they're saying at all. An intermediate high, however, I would say is someone who can express themselves, often maybe in the way that you want. You can say pretty much most of what you want to say in the way that you want to say it. However, those have to be familiar topics. So you're not going to be able to talk about anything you want to say regarding, nuclear fusion or, political events. But within the stuff that you've learned, you should be able to hold a conversation. Intermediate high, I would say, is the beginning of the fluency range. If somebody says they're fluent, doesn't mean that they're as good as a Korean. By fluency, I mean that you can talk about anything you want, any way that you want without any difficulty. And some people who are an intermediate high can have conversations about most basic things as long as they're familiar with it and can keep up and say most of what they want to say in mostly the way that they want to say it. So that's intermediate high. Advanced low is you can usually express yourself in the way that you want, And you can also tackle topics that are more unfamiliar to you. So I'd say advanced people are those who can really grab the context of what you're talking about and not just the words that are being thrown around. While you're probably speaking Korean at, intermediate high to advanced low level, you're not going to be really comfortable with what you're doing. You might feel really stressed that you can't say everything you want to say, even though to a Korean, it might appear like you're fluent. They might think, wow, this guy can say everything. You might feel personally frustrated that you're not able to still say more. And I remember being stuck around the intermediate high to advanced low level for quite a while, where I was able to say most of what I wanted to say, but not quite in the way I wanted to. And if I couldn't say something, I would have to switch and say something much more simple, and I didn't want that. So it was really frustrating. High advances, you can express yourself pretty much always in the way that you want. So it could be about, from everything from basic things like talking about the weather or your hobbies or what you're doing or what you like, to new topics. You meet someone and they say, oh, my hobby is I like drawing. Maybe you don't draw and you don't know anything about that, but you could still have a comfortable conversation about unfamiliar topics. So that's what I would put as a theme for advanced level, is that you can talk about unfamiliar topics, whether you're really comfortable with it in high level or less comfortable with low level. I mentioned something about fluency. Now, fluency is not being high advanced necessarily. Fluency can start to appear, like I mentioned, from an intermediate high or maybe even intermediate low. Depends on how well can they use what they know. That's really what it's about. How well can you use the Korean that you're studying? And some people are really good at working with very little grammar and vocabulary. And other people have very high advanced Korean, but maybe when they speak, it doesn't sound as fluent. That's why I don't think fluency is one of these 3 levels for Korean. And I don't think necessarily fluent is going to be the best goal for everyone. Let me know where you think you are on this scale or on this scale. Let me know in the comments. And if you have any requests for future videos, leave those in the comments as well. I will see you guys later in another episode of Korean FAQ. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.